They made me hide near the wall at his wedding. I let them. Then I did the math. My brother's wedding was beautiful. I know that because I spent 4 hours watching it from the west wall. Not the back row. Not a corner table. The west wall. Specifically because the wedding coordinator pulled me aside 20 minutes before the ceremony and said very politely, "Claire has a specific vision for the aesthetic. Could you stay near the west wall during the outdoor portraits? It'll keep the lines clean." I looked over at Nate. He was maybe 3 meters away. He'd heard every word. He gave me a half shrug and said, "It's just photos, man. It's not that deep." So I stood near the west wall. I watched my brother get married. I watched the photographer reframe every shot the moment I stepped close enough to be in it. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I did the one thing I was apparently good at. I stayed in the background. What I didn't do was forget. By Monday morning, my brother's phone was ringing from the bank. He had absolutely no idea why. And by the time he figured it out, there wasn't much left to explain. To understand what happened at that wedding, you need to know what I did 3 years before it. Nate is my younger brother by 5 years. When we were kids, he was the one with big ideas and not enough patience to see them through. I was the opposite, steady, quiet, maybe too patient. For a long time that worked for us. He'd come to me with something half-baked, and I'd help him figure out if it was real. So when he told me he wanted to lease a warehouse space for a small distribution business, I listened. He'd done the research. He had a client lined up. What he didn't have was the credit score to get approved on his own. The lease was $3,200 a month. He needed a co-signer. I signed. That's not me saying I was generous. That's just what happened. He was my brother, the business made sense, and I believed in him. A few months after he moved inventory into that space and landed his second client, he called me late on a Tuesday evening. I could hear him smiling through the phone. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. I told him to stop being sentimental, but I remembered it. That was before Claire. She came into Nate's life about 18 months before the wedding. I didn't dislike her. She was sharp, she knew what she wanted, and she had a way of organizing everything around her into something that looked perfect from the outside. She ran a lifestyle page decor, food intentional living, and her feed was immaculate. Every photo curated. Every frame deliberate. Clean lines. I noticed something at their engagement party. Claire's sister was posting photos in real time. I picked up my phone and scrolled through. I looked for myself. I looked for our parents. I found Nate and Claire's friends, and a lot of soft light and white flowers. I thought maybe I'd missed the shots. Maybe I'd stepped away at the wrong moment. I scrolled back further. Nothing. I told myself it was just how the feed was styled. I told myself it didn't mean anything. 3 days before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at a table with 2 of Nate's work colleagues. Not with our parents. Not with our cousins. With people I'd never met who spent the whole night talking about Nate's business, the warehouse, the growth, the lease. I smiled, passed the bread, and told myself, it's just dinner. It's not that deep. The wedding was at an outdoor venue about 40 minutes outside the city. String lights, white linen. The kind of place that photographs beautifully from every angle. I arrived early the way you do when it's your brother's wedding and you want to be useful. 20 minutes before the ceremony, the wedding coordinator found me near the entrance. She was pleasant about it. Professional. She touched my arm lightly and lowered her voice like she was doing me a favor. "Claire has a specific vision for the ceremony shots," she said. "We're keeping things minimal and clean. Would you be able to stay near the west wall during the outdoor portraits? It'll keep the lines clean." I stood there for a moment. I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. Then I was sure, and I wished I hadn't. Nate was standing maybe 3 meters behind her. Close enough to hear every word. I looked at him. Not angry. I just looked the way you look at someone when you need them to say something. He met my eyes. He gave a small shrug, the kind that's supposed to mean it's no big deal but actually means I'm not going to do anything about this. "It's just photos, man," he said. "It's not that deep." I nodded. I didn't say anything. I turned and walked toward the west wall, and I stood there while the photographer set up his equipment, and the guests took their seats and the ceremony began without me in the frame. 40 minutes. That's how long the outdoor portraits took. I counted because there wasn't much else to do. No one came over to check on me. No one said anything. The one exception was my cousin Melissa, who had been quietly placed near a column on the opposite side of the venue. We caught each other's eyes once. Neither of us smiled. I didn't know it then, but Melissa had been paying very close attention all day. That would matter later. The ceremony itself was short. 22 minutes. I know because I watched the whole thing from the same spot I'd been assigned, and when you're not in the frame, you notice things other people don't. I noticed the photographer. Specifically, I noticed how he moved. He was good at his job, deliberate, quiet, always positioning before the shot. And I watched him over the course of that ceremony adjust his angle no fewer than 5 times the moment I drifted within range of the composition. It wasn't accidental. It was practiced. He'd shift left, the frame would tighten, and I'd be outside it again. Clean lines. I didn't say anything. I stood where I was told to stand, and I watched my brother get married, and I told myself that photographs were just photographs. They weren't the marriage. They weren't the relationship. I had co-signed a lease for this man. A seating chart and a camera angle weren't going to change that. I almost believed it. When the ceremony ended, and guests moved inside for the reception, I found the seating chart near the entrance. White card-printed names, table numbers, in small serif font. I found mine quickly. Table 9. I followed the layout with my finger. Table 9 was near the back close to the service door with a partial view of the ceiling and no view of the stage at all. Claire's parents were at table 2. Her college friends at table 3. Our parents. Nate's own parents were at table 5, which I thought was at least something until I realized that Melissa and I were the only members of Nate's family not at table 5. Melissa was already seated when I got there. She looked at me. I looked at the table. Neither of us said anything about it because there was nothing to say that wouldn't ruin what was left of the evening. I sat down, picked up my phone, and opened Instagram. Claire's sister had been posting since the ceremony. I scrolled through wide shots of the aisle close-ups of the bouquet candid moments near the altar. Beautiful photos. Genuinely beautiful. I looked for familiar faces. I found Nate. I found Claire. I found Claire's mother, in a blue dress near the front row, laughing at something. I kept scrolling. I went back to the engagement party posts. I went back further to the bridal shower. Our parents weren't in a single frame. I wasn't in a single frame. I took screenshots. Not because I had a plan, just because I needed to be certain I was seeing what I was seeing. Every event, every post, every carefully composed image, curated to tell a story that didn't include us. I put my phone face down on the table and picked up my water glass and reminded myself to keep breathing. Halfway through dinner, I leaned over to Melissa and said I'd be back in a minute. I found Nate near the bar between the speeches, and I touched his arm. I need to talk to you, I said. 5 minutes. We stepped outside to a small terrace off the main hall. I kept my voice level. I told him I'd seen the photos from tonight and from the engagement party, and that I needed to understand what was happening, because I'd signed my name to a 3-year lease for him, and I was eating dinner next to a service door. He looked at me the way people look at you when they've already decided not to hear what you're saying. It's her page, he said. She has a vision for it. That's not something I control. Nate. It's my wedding day. His voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. We are not doing this today. And he turned and walked back inside. I stood on that terrace alone. No one came to check. Not after a minute, not after 5. The sound of the reception drifted out through the glass doors, music, laughter, the beginning of the best man's toast. I listened to all of it from the outside, which I was beginning to understand was exactly where I was supposed to be. I went back inside. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because leaving early felt like giving them the satisfaction of a clean exit, one less person to work around. Maybe because I'm the kind of person who finishes things. Either way, I sat back down at table 9 next to Melissa, and I picked up my fork and I listened to the best man's toast. He was funny. The room laughed at the right moments. And then he said the thing that lodged itself somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there for the rest of the night. Nate, he said, raising his glass, you have always built things from scratch. From nothing. And look at what you've made. The room lifted their glasses. I lifted mine. I smiled the way you smile when you're the only person in the room doing math nobody else can see. 3 years ago, Nate's credit score couldn't get him approved for that warehouse lease. My name on that document was the thing that made his business possible. From scratch wasn't wrong exactly. It was just missing a signature. I didn't say that out loud. I drank my water and set the glass down quietly. A little while later, Claire made her rounds. She was gracious about it, touching shoulders, laughing, moving through the room like someone who had choreographed every detail of the evening, which I was beginning to understand she had. She reached our table near the end of her loop. She looked at me and smiled warm. And slightly distracted the way you smile at someone whose name you're trying to remember. I hope you're having fun back here, she said. The lighting near the east side is actually really nice for the vibe. Back here, the vibe. She moved on before I could respond. I'm not sure she expected one. I sat with that for a moment. Then I excused myself, walked out to the parking lot and got into my car. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there in the dark and did the math slowly, and honestly the way I should have done it months ago. The lease. The term. The amount. The years I'd been available and present and useful, and the precise distance between that and where I'd been seated tonight. I opened my phone. I drafted an email to the bank, formal, specific, requesting to initiate cosigner release proceedings on the warehouse lease. I read it twice. My thumb hovered over send. I didn't press it. I locked my phone, put it in my pocket, and went back inside. I sat at table 9 until the dinner service ended. I did not make a scene. I did not pull Nate aside again. I finished what was on my plate, said goodnight to our parents and drove home, but the draft was still there. When the dinner service ended, I found our parents near the gift table and told them I was heading out. My mother looked surprised. The dancing hadn't started yet and there was still cake. I told her I had an early morning. She accepted that. She hugged me. My father shook my hand and said to drive safe. I found Melissa near the coat check. She looked at me for a second, not with pity, not with a question, just with the kind of look that means I see exactly what's happening and I'm sorry it happened to you. That was enough. I didn't look for Nate on my way out. Not because I was making a point. He was somewhere in the middle of the room with Claire, surrounded by her friends and her family, and her carefully arranged evening, and I didn't have anything left to say to him that would have made a difference tonight. So I walked out through the main doors, got in my car, and drove home. At 1:47 that night, I opened my phone and found the draft. I read it once more. I added a line, a reference to the loan documentation, and the specific lease term then. I addressed a copy to my attorney. I read it one final time. Then I sent it. It was a formal notification to the bank I was initiating proceedings to be released as cosigner on the warehouse lease. Standard process. Documented. Completely legal. I turned off the lamp and went to sleep. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I didn't check it again until morning. By 7:43 a.m. I had 14 messages. Family members asking why I'd left early. Melissa, who had texted at midnight, I saw what they did with the seating. You were right to leave. And then between two unread messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, a text from Claire. You really ruined everything today. I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot, set the phone down and went to make coffee. I had a feeling Nate would be calling soon. I just needed to wait for the bank to open. Nate called at just after 10 in the morning. I'd finished one cup of coffee and was halfway through a second when my phone lit up on the counter. I let it ring twice. Not to be dramatic, just because I was still standing at the window, and then I answered. He wasn't shouting. Nate rarely shouts. But I could hear it in the way his words came out faster than usual, slightly compressed, like he was managing something just below the surface. What did you do? He said. You sent something to the bank. The warehouse, that's everything right now, you know that. Why would you do this? I told him I understood. I told him the bank would be in touch about the timeline for the cosigner release, and that if he needed help finding an alternative, I could point him in the right direction. Because of photos. His voice cracked slightly on the word. Because you didn't like the seating. That's insane. You know that's insane. There it was again. The same move, just louder this time. Take something real. Shrink it down to its smallest possible version. And tell the other person they're overreacting. I'd heard it at the ceremony. I'd heard it on the terrace. This was the third time. And I noticed that the third time it didn't land at all. I need you to do something, I said. Open Instagram. Go to Claire's page. Find the wedding photos from yesterday. A pause. Now find me in one of them. Take your time. Silence. Go back to the engagement party. Find mom. Find dad. The silence stretched longer. I didn't fill it. I stood near the west wall for 4 hours, Nate, I said. I sat at the table by the service door. I didn't say anything during the ceremony or the toasts or the reception. I gave you every opportunity to handle this differently, and I co-signed your lease for 3 years. So tell me which one of us wasn't treating this like it was real. He didn't answer that. What he said instead was, this isn't the same thing. You're comparing wedding photos to a business lease. That's not a fair comparison. I let that sit for a second. You're right, I said. It's not the same. Photos are just aesthetic. A lease is real. Funny which one you acted like mattered. I didn't say anything else after that. I just waited. After a moment he said, quieter now. Did Claire text you this morning? She did, I said. What did she say? I read it to him exactly as she'd written it. You really ruined everything today. I didn't add anything. I didn't editorialize. I just let the words sit between us on the line. Then I said I stood near the west wall. I sat at the back table. I did not ruin your wedding. I stopped holding up something that had been using me as a structural beam for a very long time. He didn't respond right away. That silence after everything was the first one that felt like it actually meant something. A few minutes later, Nate called back with our parents on the line. I'm not sure what he was hoping for, maybe that having everyone together would diffuse it somehow. What actually happened was that my mother asked why I'd left early, and instead of explaining, I just said, "Pull up Claire's Instagram. Find the wedding album. Find yourselves in it." I heard my father ask my mother something quietly. I heard the sound of scrolling. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then my father's voice, very steady. The way it gets when he's choosing every word, "Nate. Where are we in the album?" Nate didn't answer. Nobody pushed him. Nobody needed to. The album was public. The timestamps were there. 3 years of family showing up and not a single frame that included us. My father didn't need me to explain it. He could see it himself. Shortly after the call ended, a message came through from Melissa. "Your mom just called me. She's not happy. Not with you." I set my phone down on the counter. I poured what was left of the coffee into my cup. I stood at the window for a while and looked at nothing in particular. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting something very heavy down in the exact place it should have been put a long time ago. A few days passed quietly. Then Nate called again. This time his voice was different, slower, more careful, like someone who had spent several days thinking about what they actually wanted to say before saying it. The bank had been in touch. The co-signer release process had a timeline of 30 to 60 days, during which he'd need to either demonstrate independent creditworthiness or find a replacement co-signer. His credit score alone wasn't going to be enough. He knew that. I knew that. Neither of us pretended otherwise. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" he asked. It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't another deflection either. It was the first time in the entire conversation, in several conversations really, that he'd asked a question, instead of shutting one down. "Probably, yeah," I said. "But I need to know you understand what actually happened, not the photos, not the seating chart as a standalone thing. What happened over time?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I should have said something when they told you to stand over there." 6 words. Not a full accounting, not a breakdown, not everything that needed to be said. But it was the first crack that was real. The first thing he'd offered that didn't minimize or redirect. I didn't rush to fill the space around it with forgiveness because that wouldn't have been honest, and I think he knew that. "If you want me back on that lease," I said, "I need a real conversation. Just us. No group call, no agenda. Just brothers talking like brothers." He said, "Okay." We didn't schedule it that day, but we would. In the meantime, something quieter was happening on the edges of the family. Melissa had spoken to our mother. 2 cousins who'd seen Claire's Instagram posts had their own conversations. Nobody was staging an intervention or drawing battle lines. It was more like a slow recalibration, the kind that happens when a group of people all notice the same thing at the same time and stop pretending they haven't. My mother called me on a Thursday evening. She didn't say much. She asked how I was doing, really the way she asks when she already knows the answer isn't great. I told her I was okay. She said she was glad I'd said something. It was the first time in a long time that she'd called me first. I've had some time to sit with all of it now. Not to process it in the way people mean when they use that word, not therapy speak, not a clean narrative arc with a lesson at the end. Just time. The kind where you stop replaying the moments and start seeing the shape of the whole thing instead. For a long time, I was the background brother. Not because anyone forced me into it, I want to be honest about that. I signed the lease because I believed in him. I showed up to the rehearsal dinner and sat where they put me. I stood near the west wall because I told myself it wasn't that deep. Every time I minimized something that mattered, I told myself I was being easygoing. Mature. Not the kind of person who makes everything about himself. What I was actually doing was making myself smaller so that someone else's frame could stay clean. Claire wanted curated. She got it. I removed myself so completely from the picture that even I stopped looking for my own reflection in it. Nate said it wasn't that deep, and maybe for him it wasn't until the bank called, and suddenly the depth became very measurable, very specific. 30 to 60 days specific. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I think some things only become visible when they cost something. And I needed it to cost something before I could stop pretending the price was always mine to pay alone. I'm not the background brother anymore. Not because someone finally moved me to a better table, because I got up. If you've ever been the one who signs the paperwork and gets seated by the service door, the person who holds things up and gets cropped out of the frame, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Tell me how you handled it, or how you wish you had. The West Wall doesn't hold me anymore. Then again, it never did. I was the one doing the holding.